The town of Port Blossom, Maine, in the early days of June 2022, still carried the characteristic bustle of a dynamic coastal economy. But in a small house at the end of a quiet alley, a storm was silently forming, a storm more devastating than any hurricane far out at sea. Michael Sullivan sat frozen on the sofa, his head in his hands, his vacant eyes glued to the DNA test report on the table. The words and numbers on it were sharper and more painful to him than 1,000 knives. The conclusion: the sample from the alleged father, Michael Sullivan, and the sample from a child, Leo Sullivan, showed no biological relationship. No biological relationship. Those 3 short words had struck like a thunderbolt, shattering everything. It shattered the image of the happy family he had always been so proud of. It shattered his faith in the wife he loved with all his heart. And it shattered his entire world, turning it all into a cruel deception. It all started with a grim coincidence 2 weeks ago. During a visit to the doctor for his second son, 2-year-old Leo, who had a high fever, the doctors requested a blood test. The results returned with a piece of information that stunned Michael. Leo had type O blood. This would have been perfectly normal if he had not recalled his high school biology. Michael Sullivan had type AB blood, and his wife, Jessica Sullivan, had type A. According to the most basic laws of genetics, a couple with AB and A blood types could not possibly have a child with type O blood. It was an impossibility. At first, he tried to reassure himself that the hospital must have made a mistake. But a seed of doubt had been planted in his heart, and it quickly sprouted, growing into a toxic obsession. He started paying closer attention to his wife. He replayed every detail of their past. He began to scrutinize the appearance of the son he had once loved unconditionally. The older the boy got, the less he resembled him. The suspicion grew day by day, gnawing at his mind, transforming him from a loving husband into a pathologically jealous man. Unable to bear the torment any longer, he made a secret decision. He covertly took a sample of his and Leo's hair and brought it to a DNA testing center in the city, lying that it was for a friend who needed a test done. And now, the result was right before his eyes, clear and undeniable. Jealousy and a sense of betrayal erupted, incinerating all of Michael's reason. He was no longer the gentle man who loved his wife and child. He had turned into a wounded beast. That evening, when Jessica Sullivan came home from work, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Michael, with bloodshot eyes, threw the test results in her face, spewing insults and unleashing a brutal beating. "Explain this," Michael roared, his hands gripping his wife by the shoulders. "Whose son is Leo? Who did you sleep with to have him?" After the initial shock, Jessica could only cry, vehemently proclaiming her innocence. She swore she had never done anything to wrong her husband, that she was completely faithful. But against the irrefutable scientific evidence, all her oaths were meaningless. Beaten, humiliated, and facing the collapse of her family, Jessica fell into utter despair. In her panic, as she tried to sift through her memories for an explanation, a strange detail from over 2 years ago suddenly flashed into her mind. A detail she had thought was normal at the time, but which now, in the light of this tragedy, seemed incredibly suspicious. She remembered that about 2 years ago, sometime after giving birth to their first child, she had developed a severe case of hemorrhoids. Based on many recommendations, she had sought out the Croft Specialist Clinic, run by Dr. Alan Croft, a renowned specialist in the region. Dr. Croft, a middle-aged man with a dignified, respectable appearance and a very gentle way of speaking, was praised by everyone for his high skill and admirable medical ethics. At the clinic, after an examination, Dr. Croft said her case required a minor surgery. But the strange thing was, he suggested using general anesthesia. Jessica was a bit puzzled at the time, thinking that such a simple procedure should only require a local anesthetic. But Dr. Croft explained persuasively that general anesthesia would ensure the patient felt no pain at all, allowing the surgery to be performed with the utmost precision and comfort. Trusting the doctor's reputation and prestige, she had agreed. She recalled the feeling after waking up from the surgery. Her body was extremely tired, exhausted, a fatigue completely different from her previous C-section. And notably, she had a stinging, uncomfortable sensation in her private area, accompanied by some strange discharge. When she asked Dr. Croft about it, he smiled reassuringly, saying it was just a common side effect of the anesthesia, causing a temporary disturbance that would resolve on its own in a few days. Believing the professional explanation of a skilled doctor, she thought nothing more of it. And then, Exactly 9 months after that minor surgery, she gave birth to Leo Sullivan. That memory now struck Jessica's chaotic mind like a bolt of lightning. A crazy, sick, and horrifying hypothesis that was almost too incredible to believe began to form. Could it be? Could it be that while she was unconscious on the operating table, that respectable doctor had taken advantage of her defenseless state to commit a depraved act? As outlandish as it seemed, that hypothesis was the only logical explanation for everything. It explained why the child was not biologically related to her husband. It explained the fatigue and the unusual symptoms she had experienced after the surgery. It explained it all. Trembling, Jessica recounted the entire story and her hypothesis to her husband. After listening, Michael Sullivan went from being a jealous husband to being stunned with horror. His anger was replaced by a profound fear and outrage toward the man who had caused this tragedy. He looked at his 2-year-old son sleeping soundly in his crib, his heart twisting in pain. The boy was innocent. His wife was innocent. She was just a victim. The only guilty one was the devil in an angel's disguise, the virtuous doctor everyone had always praised. Without a moment's hesitation, the Sullivans went together to the state police headquarters. They were not there to report an affair, they were there to report a rape, a crime intricately hidden under the guise of a medical procedure. At the state police headquarters, the complaint from Michael and Jessica Sullivan went directly to the desk of the head of the Criminal Investigation Division. The contents of the letter, with its bizarre details and an unprecedentedly horrifying hypothesis, immediately garnered special attention from the leadership. A rape, if it was indeed carried out by a reputable doctor on the operating table under the cover of life-saving anesthesia, was a crime of exceptional severity not only for its brutality but also because it directly attacked the most sacred trust between patient and physician. A top-secret special task force was immediately formed. The man appointed to lead the charge was Detective Marcus Thorne, an investigator famous for his meticulousness and sharp analysis of criminal psychology. He understood that the subject of this case was not a street criminal, it was an old wolf in the sheep's clothing of a respected intellectual. Any investigative action, no matter how small, if not conducted secretly and skillfully, would tip their hand, giving the suspect time to destroy evidence and create a perfect counter-narrative. The investigation began in absolute silence. The first and most crucial step for the task force was to determine if Jessica's hypothesis had any basis. Was this an isolated incident, a momentary lapse of control by the doctor, or was it a systematic method of assault that had been repeated many times in the past? To answer this question, Detective Thorne made a bold decision: to screen data on a massive scale. A special team of the best experts in information technology and data analysis was assembled. Their task was to silently collect 2 huge sources of data. The first, through operational measures, was the complete medical records of all patients who had visited and been treated at the Croft Specialist Clinic over the past 3 years. The second source was the birth records of all children born in the entire county during that same period. This was an incredibly immense and tedious task, like finding a needle in a haystack. Thousands of names, dates, and addresses were fed into a computer system. The experts began writing complex algorithms to cross-reference these 2 datasets, searching for an abnormal pattern. They were looking for cases of women who, after visiting Dr. Croft's clinic for medical procedures, even minor ones, had suddenly become pregnant and given birth within a suspicious timeframe around 9 months later. Days passed in a tense haze. The team barely slept, their eyes constantly glued to the dense lines of data on their computer screens. And then, their patience paid off. The system began to return the first results. At first, it was just 1 matching case, then 2, then 3. And when the screening process was complete, a chillingly abnormal pattern emerged clearly on the screen. Besides Jessica Sullivan's case, there were 10 other women who shared the same fateful script. All of them were married women between the ages of 25 and 35. All of them had sought treatment at Dr. Croft's clinic for common ailments unrelated to reproduction, such as hemorrhoid removal, minor fibroid surgery, or even just an endoscopy. And all of them, strangely, had become pregnant and given birth within a window of 9 to 10 months after their visit to the clinic. What was particularly telling was that 7 of these 10 women had previously had difficulty conceiving or had stated they would not have any more children. 11 children, including Leo, had been born after fateful visits to the virtuous doctor's clinic. This could no longer be a coincidence. It was a clear sign of a systematic crime, a modus operandi repeated multiple times over the past 3 years. Jessica's hypothesis was no longer an isolated theory. It had become a serial rape case with a potential victim count in the dozens. This horrifying discovery stunned the entire task force. The level of depravity and sickness of Alan Croft far exceeded all initial predictions. He was not a monster who acted on impulse. He was a methodical predator who had turned his clinic into a trap and his trusting patients into helpless prey. But Detective Thorne knew that even though the pattern was clear, this was still just circumstantial evidence. To convict Alan Croft, he needed direct proof, an undeniable link between the man and at least one of the children. He needed his DNA. The discovery of the 10 other suspicious cases had turned a single hypothesis into a deadly pattern. In the task force command room, the atmosphere grew heavier than ever. The whiteboard was now covered with photos of 11 women unwitting victims and 11 innocent children born from an unforgivable crime. Detective Marcus Thorne knew he was facing a case of unprecedented complexity and sensitivity. He was not just dealing with a rapist, but a highly educated monster, a serial predator perfectly hidden under the guise of a socially respected medical professional. "We can't act based on statistics," he said during a meeting with the core members of the task force. "What we have is strong circumstantial evidence, but in court, it will not be enough. Alan Croft is too smart and has a solid social standing. He will easily hire the best lawyers to pick apart our arguments. To take down this old fox, we need concrete proof, irrefutable scientific evidence. We have to get his DNA and compare it directly with Leo Sullivan's DNA." The question was raised: how to get a DNA sample from a subject who was always careful, did not smoke, and almost never appeared in public places outside his clinic. Surveillance to collect a discarded cigarette butt or a used cup was nearly impossible and carried a high risk of exposure. A direct request was out of the question. After hours of intense discussion, a bold and risky plan, but the only viable one, was devised. They would set a trap. They would voluntarily send bait into the tiger's den, not to catch the tiger, but to pluck one of its hairs. The person chosen for this near-impossible mission was Officer Isabella Rossi, one of the youngest but most capable and intelligent female officers in the division. Izzy had a pleasant, gentle appearance and an outstanding ability for undercover roles. She had succeeded in many undercover operations, infiltrating complex criminal networks. But this time, her task was exponentially more difficult. She was not just facing common criminals, but an intelligent man with psychological manipulation skills and expertise in the medical field. The preparation for Izzy's role was meticulous. She did not just have to become a patient, she had to become a completely different person. The task force experts built her a perfect cover. Anna Peterson, 26, an elementary school teacher who had recently moved from another state and was newly married. A fake medical history was also created, noting a history of mild hemorrhoids after a difficult birth. The police department's medical consultants spent hours training Izzy on symptoms, medical terminology, and even the feelings a real patient would experience to ensure she would not reveal any flaws. And then, the day of the sting arrived. Izzy, in the role of Anna, wore an elegant business dress, her face lightly made up but showing the anxiety and embarrassment of a young woman facing a sensitive medical issue for the first time. She went alone to the Croft Specialist Clinic. Dr. Croft's clinic, true to its reputation, looked incredibly professional and clean. The bright space, with the faint, reassuring smell of antiseptic, gave patients a sense of peace. Izzy was invited into the examination room by a female nurse after a short wait. Dr. Alan Croft sat there, behind a lavish mahogany desk. He was in his early 50s, tall and well-built, with salt and pepper hair neatly combed. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and when he looked up at the patient, he offered an incredibly warm, fatherly smile. "Hello, please have a seat," he said, his voice low and soothing. "What can I help you with today?" Though her heart was pounding, Izzy maintained a shy and troubled demeanor. She began to present her prepared story about her condition worsening after childbirth, about the discomfort and pain it caused in her daily life. Dr. Croft listened with intense focus and patience. He nodded, asked very professional questions, and took notes carefully. The entire initial consultation went perfectly, with nothing suspicious. He was truly an expert, a model physician. Without knowing the truth, anyone, including Izzy, would have been completely won over by his dedication and professionalism. After the examination, Dr. Croft sat back at his desk, looking at Izzy with a sympathetic gaze. Your case is not too severe, but if left untreated, it will significantly affect your quality of life, he said. In my opinion, we should perform a minor surgery to resolve it completely. It is a very simple procedure, about 20 to 30 minutes, and you can go home right after and resume normal activities. Izzy nodded, pretending to listen intently. And then, the fox began to show its tail. However, Dr. Croft continued, the surgical area is quite sensitive. Although we can use a local anesthetic, you might still feel some discomfort and stress during the procedure. That could affect your mental state and the precision of the surgery. To ensure you have the most comfortable experience, completely free of pain and anxiety, I recommend we use general anesthesia. Even though Izzy had anticipated this, she could not help but shudder hearing him say it himself. This was it. This was his method, the master key that had opened the door to his crimes for so many years. He used his medical knowledge, his persuasive and caring words, to turn conscious patients into immobile, defenseless bodies, allowing him to carry out his perverted acts. General anesthesia? Izzy feigned surprise and a little worry. Is that necessary, doctor? I heard this kind of minor surgery only needs a local anesthetic. It is true that we can use local, Dr. Croft smiled, a smile full of an expert's confidence. But trust me, I have performed thousands of cases like this. The patient's absolute comfort and safety are always my top priorities. Anesthesia will help your body relax completely, allowing me to perform the procedure with the utmost precision. When you wake up, you will feel like you just had a short nap, nothing more. To a normal patient, those words would have been incredibly reassuring. But to Izzy, they were nothing short of a confession. She knew she had succeeded in confirming his modus operandi. Well, if you say so, doctor, I will follow your advice, she nodded, pretending to be completely convinced. She agreed to the surgery and scheduled an appointment for 3 days later. This would give her a legitimate reason to return. The first part of the mission was a success, but the hardest part was yet to come. On her return, she would not only face the risk of being genuinely anesthetized but also have to find an opportunity, a single moment of carelessness from this old fox, to obtain his DNA sample. Officer Izzy Rossi left the Croft clinic, her mind still reeling. The act had been successful, but the direct contact with a devil in a virtuous guise like Alan Croft left her with an indescribable feeling of disgust. At the task force command center, the audio recording she brought back was played. The room was silent, only the low, persuasive voice of Dr. Croft could be heard, recommending general anesthesia for an unnecessary minor surgery. To an outsider, it was the voice of a dedicated physician. But to the task force, it was a confession. Modus operandi confirmed, Detective Thorne said, his voice firm. He uses his reputation and medical knowledge to manipulate patients, turning them into helpless prey. The next mission, the decisive one, will be even harder. On her return, Izzy not only faces the risk of being put under, but she must also secure his DNA. The entire team once again dove into planning, creating a new, more detailed and meticulous strategy. They analyzed every minor habit of Dr. Croft, from the way he spoke and moved to whether he drank water while working. Every option was considered, and every risk was calculated. A special operations team would be positioned just outside the clinic, ready to breach the door if Izzy gave the emergency signal. The officer's life was the top priority. 3 days later, the decisive moment arrived. Izzy, as the young teacher Anna, returned to the clinic. This time, she was not alone. A male officer played the role of her anxious husband, tasked with distracting the nurses in the outer office. Stepping into the clinic, the atmosphere felt slightly different. It was more professional and colder, lacking the warm welcome of the first visit. She was led to a small pre-op room, asked to change into a gown, and lie on the bed to wait. Izzy's heart was racing, but her face still held the anxious, fearful expression of a patient about to go into surgery. A few minutes later, Dr. Alan Croft entered. He still wore that benevolent smile. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Do not worry too much. It will be just like a short nap." He walked over to a small table in the corner where there was a water pitcher and some paper cups. He poured a full cup. "Have some water to calm your nerves," he said, offering the cup to Izzy. But she skillfully refused. "No, thank you, doctor. I am afraid I might get nauseous from the anesthesia later." Dr. Croft nodded in understanding. Then, as if to demonstrate his friendliness, he took a large gulp from that very cup himself. After drinking, instead of throwing it in the trash, he placed the cup, still half full of water, back on the table. This was it. The opportunity the entire task force had prayed for had finally appeared. "You rest here," Dr. Croft said. "I am going to prepare the operating room. A nurse will be in to get you in about 5 minutes." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Izzy was alone in the room. 5 minutes. She had exactly 5 minutes. The paper cup, a piece of evidence more precious than gold, was sitting there on the table, just a few feet away. But how could she get it safely? Outside, the door was only partially closed. A nurse could walk in at any moment. She glanced around. No security cameras in the room. Good. She sat up quietly, trying not to make a sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She strained to listen outside. She could only hear distant footsteps and hushed voices. The window of opportunity was fleeting. Izzy moved as swiftly as a panther to the table, her hands covered in thin, pre-prepared medical gloves. In one fluid, professional motion, she picked up Dr. Croft's paper cup. She poured the remaining water into a potted plant in the corner. The damp paper cup, rich with the perpetrator's saliva and DNA, was quickly placed into a small, sterile zip-top bag. That bag was immediately hidden in a secret compartment designed into her patient gown. Then, she took an identical, clean paper cup that she had brought with her and placed it back in the exact same spot on the table. The entire switch took less than 10 seconds, silent and perfect. She had just managed to get back on the bed and lie down when the door opened. A female nurse entered. "The doctor sent me to prep you," the nurse said. Izzy's heart felt like it would leap out of her chest, but she kept her breathing steady. "Okay," she replied softly. The evidence was in hand. The mission was complete. Now it was time to retreat. According to the plan, just as the nurse was preparing to administer a sedative, the personal phone Izzy had left in a locker outside suddenly rang loudly. It was the pre-arranged signal from her husband waiting in the lobby. The nurse was slightly annoyed. "Who is calling you at a time like this?" "Oh, it must be my husband," Izzy said, feigning confusion. "It must be something urgent. Can I please take the call for a moment?" She hurried out to grab the phone. On the other end, her teammate spoke a short, coded phrase. Izzy began the final act. She returned to the room, her face pale and panicked. "Nurse, doctor," she said through sobs. "It is my mom. Back home. She has just been rushed to the emergency room. I have to go right away. I guess we will have to do the surgery another time. I am so sorry, doctor, I am so sorry." Dr. Croft was called in. Hearing the patient's story, his benevolent face flashed with a hint of annoyance and frustration. His plan had been ruined at the last minute. But faced with such an urgent and humane reason, he could not force the patient to stay. "All right, that is fine," he said, trying to maintain a sympathetic tone. "Family is the most important thing. You go take care of your mother. When things have settled down, come back, and I will reschedule the surgery for you." "Yes, thank you, doctor." Izzy thanked him profusely and, along with her husband, hurriedly left the clinic. Once safely inside an unmarked car waiting on a nearby street, Izzy let out a sigh of relief. She carefully took out the zip-top bag containing the evidence and handed it to Detective Thorne, who was waiting. Her entire body was drenched in a cold sweat. The most dangerous mission was complete. "Good work," Detective Thorne said, his voice filled with respect. "You did very well." Without a moment's delay, the bag was placed in a specialized evidence container. A police vehicle immediately set off, driving through the night, carrying the hopes of the entire task force towards the State Forensics Lab in Augusta. The board had been set, the bait had been taken, and the decisive evidence was in hand. Now, all they could do was wait for science to speak, wait for the final conclusion that would put an end to the crimes of the devil in a doctor's coat. The days of waiting for the DNA analysis results were the longest and most tense for the entire task force. Despite having the modus operandi and a chain of circumstantial evidence, Detective Marcus Thorne and his team knew that all their efforts could be for nothing if the DNA on the paper cup did not match. Alan Croft was too cunning, too devious. Without irrefutable scientific evidence, he would easily escape conviction and, worse, could countersue the police department for defamation, causing an unprecedented legal and media crisis. At a safe house, Officer Izzy was still under strict protection. Though she had completed her mission flawlessly, she could not yet breathe easy. The image of Dr. Croft's benevolent smile and cold eyes still haunted her. She knew that as long as the perpetrator was not behind bars, she and the other victims were not truly safe. At their home, Michael and Jessica Sullivan were also living through days of anxiety. Detective Thorne had informed them of the plan and the operative's initial success. They were hopeful but also terrified. They hoped for justice to be served soon, but they also feared facing a truth so cruel, a truth that would forever change their lives and that of their innocent son. And then, on the afternoon of the third day after the sample was sent, the phone on Detective Thorne's desk rang. The caller ID displayed State Forensics Lab. The entire command room held its breath. He put the call on speaker for everyone to hear. "Thorne speaking," he said, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible. On the other end was the decisive voice of the lab's deputy director, who had personally overseen the analysis. "Detective Thorne, we have the results for the Port Blossom case. The results are very clear." The deputy director paused for a second, as if to emphasize the importance of the information to come. "The DNA profile extracted from the saliva sample on the paper cup you sent, evidence tag BH1, was compared against the DNA profile of the child, Leo Sullivan, victim tag N1. The result is a perfect match across all genetic loci. We can confirm that the subject who used the paper cup and the child have a father-son biological relationship. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. The moment he finished, the room erupted. Sighs of relief mixed with quiet applause. A few younger officers, unable to contain their joy, hugged each other. They had done it. They had the smoking gun, the ultimate weapon that no one could refute. Detective Thorne thanked the deputy director and hung up. He stood up, his face still stern, but his eyes now held a fire of determination and rage. The waiting was over. It was time for justice to be served. "All teams, assemble," he commanded, his voice echoing. "The DA's office has approved the warrant for the immediate arrest of Alan Croft and a search of the premises. We move now. Target: the Croft Specialist Clinic. We must apprehend the subject, seal the entire scene, and seize all related records and documents. I want this done fast, clean, and precise. Do not give the subject any opportunity to resist or destroy evidence." The order was given. The wheels of justice began to turn with terrifying speed and force. The convoy of unmarked police cars silently left the headquarters, without sirens, quickly approaching the clinic area. They formed two perimeters, an outer one to keep curious onlookers away, and an inner one, ready for the arrest. At 3 p.m., while the clinic was still in its normal working hours, Detective Thorne and 6 plainclothes officers walked in. Their cold, determined expressions made the quiet atmosphere inside the clinic suddenly suffocating. Before the receptionist could even ask a question, an officer flashed his badge. "State Police. We are here to execute an arrest warrant. Where is Dr. Croft?" The receptionist's face went pale with fear, and she stammered, pointing towards the main examination room. The door burst open. Dr. Alan Croft was sitting and talking with a young couple, still wearing that benevolent smile and speaking in that gentle tone. Seeing the sudden intrusion of strangers, he was slightly surprised but quickly regained his calm, dignified composure. "Excuse me, who are you? What is the meaning of barging in here while I am with a patient?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of condescending displeasure. Detective Thorne did not waste words. He walked up and stood directly in front of Alan Croft, looking him straight in the eye as he read aloud, enunciating every word of the arrest warrant. "Dr. Alan Croft, you are under arrest for the investigation of rape, under Section 141 of the Penal Code. You are required to comply." Hearing the word rape, the colour drained from Alan Croft's face, but only for a moment. He quickly composed himself and even let out a derisive laugh, as if he had just heard the most ridiculous story in the world. "You have got to be kidding me. Is this a mistake?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I am Dr. Alan Croft. Rape? How absurd. This is clearly a baseless accusation. You will pay for this insult to my honour. My lawyer will be speaking with you." He still believed that with his status and his perfect cover, no one could touch him. He did not know the game was already over. "You will have a chance to speak with your lawyer," Detective Thorne replied, his voice as cold as ice. At police headquarters, 2 large officers stepped forward, flanking Alan Croft. A pair of cold steel handcuffs was brought out. It was only then that real fear began to show in the doctor's eyes. "You cannot do this. This is a mistake." He started to yell, trying to struggle, but it was too late. A sharp, metallic click echoed. The hands that were once used to save people were now locked in the cuffs of justice. The virtuous Dr. Alan Croft was arrested and escorted out of his own clinic in front of the stunned and bewildered staff and patients. The image of a respected medical professional being handcuffed and led into a police car completely shattered a legend. As he was pushed into the car, Alan Croft looked back. He saw forensics officers in protective gear beginning to seal off the entire clinic the kingdom he had built. He knew then that this was no longer a mistake. They had found something he thought no one would ever be able to find. The last vestige of confidence on his face vanished, replaced by utter confusion and terror. The cat and mouse game was over, and the old fox was finally caught in the net. The first interrogation of Alan Croft took place in a special room at the state police headquarters. He was no longer the dignified, confident doctor. After a night in custody, his white coat had been replaced by a grey prison jumpsuit. His well-groomed appearance was gone, leaving only a middle-aged man with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes filled with confusion and defeat. He sat there silently, his cuffed hands on the table. Detective Marcus Thorne sat opposite him. He did not rush, did not threaten. He knew that with an intelligent man with a high ego like Croft, silence and irrefutable evidence were the most effective psychological tortures. He silently placed file after file on the table, each piece of evidence the task force had painstakingly collected. "This is a list of 11 women," he said in a steady voice, including Jessica Sullivan. "They all have one thing in common. After visiting your clinic for minor procedures, they all became pregnant and gave birth within a suspicious time frame." Croft glanced at the file but said nothing. "And this," Thorne continued, pushing the forensic report from the state lab towards him, "is the result of the DNA comparison between you and Leo Sullivan, Jessica Sullivan's son. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. He paused, looking directly into Croft's eyes, his voice turning sharp and cold as steel. "Do you still want to deny it, Dr. Croft?" The DNA report, with the official red seal of the highest forensic authority, was like an early death sentence that completely demolished Alan Croft's final wall of defense. He stared at the numbers that could not lie, and his body began to tremble. A long silence followed. Finally, he looked up, but not with the face of a defeated criminal. He looked at Detective Thorne, and in his eyes, instead of fear, there was a flash of sick arrogance. He laughed, a dry, chilling sound. "Rape," he said, his voice full of contempt. "You call that rape? What do you know? You cannot understand what I have done. It was not a crime. It was a gift." The entire interrogation room fell silent at his insane declaration. And then, without any further questioning, Alan Croft began his speech. A confession devoid of remorse, filled only with pathological pride and an inhuman logic. He explained that he never considered his actions to be rape. He, a brilliant doctor, a superior intellectual, always saw himself as above ordinary people. He was obsessed with the idea that his genes were a precious asset, and he had the right, even the obligation, to spread them throughout society. "I helped them," Croft said, his voice as fervent as a missionary's. "I observed my patients. There were infertile couples who sought treatment everywhere without success. There were women whose husbands were weak or sickly. I saw the longing, the desperation in their eyes, and I decided to intervene, a divine intervention." He recounted his method coldly, in detail, as if presenting a medical case. He selected his prey carefully, targeting healthy women with good family backgrounds. Then, he would use a minor medical issue to recommend a small surgery, and his master key was always general anesthesia. Under the effect of the drug, the victims would be completely unconscious, unable to resist, and upon waking, they would remember nothing. "I did not harm them," he repeated. "I only took a small moment of their unconsciousness and gave them a priceless gift. A child. A healthy, intelligent child, carrying the bloodline of a superior man like me. Look, after having those children, did their families fall apart? No. They were happier, more fulfilled. They should be thanking me. I brought them happiness. I strengthened the foundation of those families. Croft's words made even the most seasoned investigators feel sick to their stomachs. He was not just a rapist, he was a monster with a god complex, a delusional psychopath who gave himself the right to decide the fate of others' bodies and considered it a noble mission. The cruelty of his crime lay not only in the physical act but in the trampling of human dignity and the poisoning of the very concept of family happiness. He admitted to committing this act in all 11 cases the task force had identified, and possibly many more in the past that he could not recall. He felt no guilt whatsoever. In his sick mind, the children born were his creations, living proof of his greatness. I created them, he said, his eyes shining with a crazed light. I gave them life. What right do you have to judge me? The confession ended. Detective Thorne sat there in silence. He no longer felt rage. He only felt a profound sadness and disgust at the ultimate distortion of humanity. He knew the battle with Alan Croft in the interrogation room was over, but the battle outside the battle to face and deal with the horrifying consequences of his crimes had only just begun. The task force's next duty would perhaps be the most painful and difficult of all, to deliver this horrific truth to the 10 remaining families. To tell them that the child they loved with all their hearts was the result of an unforgivable crime. Alan Croft's confession closed the investigation but opened a new chapter of tragedy, one far more painful and enduring. The chapter of truth and broken pieces. The most difficult task for the task force was no longer hunting a criminal, but becoming the messengers who had to deliver this horrifying truth to the 10 remaining families' people who were still living in a false happiness, completely unaware. Detective Marcus Thorne personally took charge of this sensitive duty. He and his team, men accustomed to facing guns and criminals, now found it incredibly difficult to face the tears and collapses of innocent people. Every door they knocked on, every home they entered, they had to witness a world of happiness being destroyed in an instant. They met a husband who, after hearing the truth, sat in stunned silence. He looked at the son he adored, the child who was the pride of his entire family, then looked at his wife sobbing beside him. The love, the bond, and the happiness within him now warred with the disgusting truth about the child's origin and the violation his wife had endured. He did not say a word, just quietly walked out of the house, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than 1,000 accusations. No one knew if that family could ever be pieced back together. They also met another family where the husband, after the initial shock, exploded in rage. He did not direct his anger at the perpetrator but at his own wife. He cursed and insulted her, calling her an unchaste woman who had brought home a bastard child. He announced he was filing for divorce and disowning the child. In the face of the harsh truth, the selfish and cruel nature of a man was laid bare. The innocent child went from being an angel to an object of rejection in a heartbeat. Each family had a different reaction, each family a different tragedy. 10 families, 10 worlds of happiness, had been poisoned and destroyed from within by Alan Croft's crimes. The societal fallout he left behind was a deep wound, a spreading sense of confusion and suspicion that eroded trust in the most sacred things. Several months later, the trial of Alan Croft was held. Due to the sensitive nature of the case and to protect the identities of the victims, the trial was closed to the public. But outside, hundreds of reporters and citizens gathered, waiting for a fitting verdict. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was incredibly heavy. The 11 victim families sat in the front row, their faces numb and etched with pain. In the defendant's box, Alan Croft stood, thinner and paler, but his eyes still held no trace of remorse. He still maintained the sick arrogance of a self-proclaimed savior. The district attorney's indictment was read, exposing all of his monstrous crimes. The victims' testimonies and, above all, the irrefutable DNA analysis formed an iron cage of justice, leaving him no escape. When given the chance to make a final statement, Alan Croft did not apologize. He used those last moments to deliver a self-defensive speech, a crazed sermon about his noble mission, about how he had bestowed life. His words enraged the entire courtroom and rubbed salt in the wounds of the victim families. After deliberation, the jury delivered the final verdict. The presiding judge, in a steely and indignant voice, declared, "The actions of the defendant, Alan Croft, are an unforgivable crime, a trampling of women's dignity, of human rights, and a profound betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath and the ethics of a physician. The societal consequences caused by the defendant are exceptionally severe, shattering the happiness of dozens of families and causing deep-seated confusion and loss of faith in society. The defendant's crimes must be punished with the strictest possible sentence. The court finds the defendant, Alan Croft, guilty of rape with multiple aggravating factors, including committing the crime multiple times against multiple people and exploiting his profession to commit the crime. The sentence is life in prison. The sentence was announced, but there was no applause in the courtroom, only the choked sobs of wives and mothers. Justice had been served, but the wounds they carried would likely never heal. The case was closed. The Croft Specialist Clinic was permanently shut down, becoming a cursed place in the minds of the local people. The stories of the devil doctor would be told for years to come as a chilling warning about evil. It showed that evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes, it hides behind a benevolent smile, a warm voice, a pristine white coat. It is a painful lesson about the fragility of trust and a reminder that vigilance and a strong legal system are our final protectors against the devils who walk among us.